Hello, everybody. My name is Terry Arndt. I am the president of College Transition Publishing. Thank you for joining us today. Our program, Serving Veterans on Campus, Best Practices. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, we have muted all the phones of all the participants today. Due to the time that we're trying to keep the program in, we need to keep that muted so that we can focus on questions. And certainly, if you do have questions, there is a question box on your screen. Please do use that. Post your questions, and throughout the program, I will do my best to answer all those. A recording of the presentation will be done and conducted and emailed out to everybody who participated in the program today, so you'll be able to refer back to that, share it with your colleagues, friends, etc. In addition, if we mention any kind of links to or resources, we'll include links, images, things like that in that email follow-up so that you can follow up and gain some additional information from those. So it appears we do have everything in order. So with that, let's get started for today's program. Our presenter today is Dr. Nicholas Osborne. He recently served the Veterans Support Services at the University of Illinois and is now the Assistant Director of the Ches Family Foundation Center. He's written a number of publications. First and foremost, the one related today, Life During College, The Veteran's Guide to Success. I have a copy of the book right here. He's also written numbers of white papers and done significant research on the area as well. We'll be talking about some of those components soon. Give you a little background for those who are not participating in a webinar with Nicholas and I in the past. We met in San Diego a little over a year ago, and he came to me and asked me about resources. We had to help veterans with the transition through college, and I mentioned we have the ability to customize our books and focus on that area, but we really don't market products or create publications for niche markets. He kind of chuckled and said, I think you're missing the boat. This is not a niche market. Veterans are a significant presence on this higher education market. And after that, we had numerous discussions, and next thing you know, Nick's writing a book for us, and it's been highly successful since. So, with that, I'd like to introduce Nick. How are you today?
Terry, I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having me here, and I also appreciate all of those who are participating with us today.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time again. You know, before we get into the details of today's program, there's a couple questions I think are important to bring up. The first one is, who are student veterans, and what's their relationship between the veterans and higher ed?
Terry, it's a great question, and as we get started, I'll just start with just a really quick bio, and then also talk about how I ended up working with veterans in higher education. So I served in the Coast Guard for 8 years, both on active duty and in the reserves. I was also enlisted, and then I became an officer, and I also deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom with the Joint Forces Unit. I've worked in intelligence and law enforcement, and then when I left the military, I ended up working for the VA for nearly 4 years, and then I was recruited out here to Illinois to start the Veterans Office back in 2011. And so in this time, I've had a lot of different experiences that have really allowed me to sit with this group. But you know, you're right, we're hearing a lot about veterans in higher ed, and I'm sure for our listeners right now that this is not a new thing. We're starting to see more and more in journal articles, in pop culture and newspapers. And a large part of that is precipitated by the post 9/11 GI Bill, which formally went into effect in 2009. And what we've seen since then is just this steady flow of student veteran enrollment. And we're seeing it online, we're seeing it at private colleges, community colleges, as well as public universities where I work. And right now, veterans represent approximately 4% of the total undergraduate population. So we really haven't seen a mass influx of veterans like this in our country since World War II. So it really is a profound time for many of us in the profession, but it also begs the question of who is this population, what are their needs, and what's the best way for us to work with them and to support them?
Okay, great. So, with that feedback, there's a number of challenges I know you've expressed to me in the past about these student veterans. So what challenges are they facing as they're going through a higher ed program?
So being what we consider non-traditional learners, and what I mean by this is they're typically a little bit older or sometimes a lot older than the traditional college-age student. They come here after having quote-unquote real-world work experience, and some of them have been in combat or they've been leading other people. So we have to look beyond their chronological age and consider that they're a group with a lot of talent, a lot of experience, but they're also looking for skills. And putting them in a traditional college environment is not always the best bet. And we can't use the same lens to work with veterans that we use with traditional students. And so it really forces us to be creative. And other non-traditional features we see are that veterans are much more likely to have a dependent or to work at least part-time while going to school. And so they're not necessarily here to just have fun and to have a social life. And the other part that I think is really important, Terry, is that veterans are much more likely to commute to campus. And with that, we find them less engaged in campus activities. And so we always want to ask the question, how do we ensure that veterans feel noticed, respected, but also integrated into the larger campus community?
All good points. So I know you've had experience in starting and enhancing the veteran program there at University of Illinois. So what recommendations do you have, noting all those points from your just previous comments, of starting or enhancing a program on campus?
If you can, I think the first step is to put yourself in the perspective of the veteran. And that can be, how do I even apply to school? Or how do I coordinate moving and registering for classes? So there's a lot of administrative questions that come up. And we want to make sure that these are easy to find on the web page, that there's a single point of contact, somebody who's going to return an email or a phone call in a prompt manner. And also there's a lot of questions regarding financial aid benefits. I have multiple benefits that I'm eligible for. Which is the best one to use? If I want to go on to grad school, how do I use a combination of my benefits? So making sure that these types of things are very clearly stated and in place. So I would start with a web page, making sure that the resources are there, the contact information is there. But most importantly, Terry, I think that any successful veterans program is built upon connecting with the veterans themselves. And this can be achieved in a lot of different ways. I think it's important to have an advisory committee or a task force with members from different units on campus. We have one with financial aid, the counseling center, our disability service, our admissions office, and also have student veterans included in that group to provide perspective and guidance. We also look at doing at least 2 to 3 big visibility-based events a semester, and some of these include athletic events, bringing veterans onto the field to be recognized, ensuring that we hear their voice. Faculty and staff training is another biggie. You want to make sure that faculty and staff are aware that some of their students may be veterans and that they may have these unique needs. And there are questions that you want to ensure that you avoid when working with a veteran, as well as assumptions. And one of the things that my students have shared with me is the assumption that because they've served overseas or in a combat zone that there's quote unquote something wrong with them. I think that that's very important for faculty and staff to be aware of. And I'd say another final point is just making sure that there's a Student Veterans of America chapter present on campus, a student veteran voice, and that the Veterans Office is working in collaboration with this group and really keeping a tight handle on the climate and the experiences of their veterans. And if any veterans are to leave, have a very clear understanding as to why they're leaving.
Well, a lot of information there. So I know on your campus, you do have a program, or where you were at the University of Illinois, the program you developed for undergrad and transfer students was like a specific, like their orientation in a course, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you recommend that type of a course on other campuses? Do you think it's a good program for community college as well as a 4-year program?
I think that some of the most effective things that we've done here in Illinois is put together a student veterans lounge so they have a designated space. the veteran-specific orientations in this transition course that I'm sure we're going to talk about quite a bit today. And the reason I think that those are important are when veterans come to class for the first time here at Illinois, sometimes they haven't been students since high school. And so there's already a bit of apprehension. But again, we also have to look at what are the existing resources for our incoming students. And what we found were that many veterans just kind of rolled their eyes and said, you know, I'm sitting in this class with 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, and I don't really feel like any of the content applies to me. Or it seems to be kind of toned down for somebody who's been living at home with their parents and not really for somebody like me who's 28, married with 2 kids, and served 2 deployments overseas. So I think that the veteran-specific course is without a doubt one of the most important resources, whether it's a private, public, or community college. Very, very important resource to have.
So, you know, there's a lot of questions, and I see some coming up about developing a course. How do you go about it? What kind of elements are you looking for? Or just some of the comments that are popping up. So how do you respond to that?
This is where going back to having a task force or an advisory committee is helpful, because every school has their protocol in place to add a new course. And on our Veterans Task Force, we had a faculty member who was also a veteran. And so he was able to give a lot of leadership in terms of how we could propose and put a new course on the books. And then that brought up questions like, should it be a full semester or should it be half a semester? And what we found here at Illinois is by keeping it 8 weeks for 2 credit hours, that's been the best return for working with our students, giving them a great course experience, but also not encroaching on space for other classes that they want to be sure they're enrolled in for that semester. And I teach the course. We also have a mentoring component where all students in the class are assigned a student veteran mentor, which is another student veteran on campus. And then our curriculum is obviously tailored in a couple of different ways that we can talk about if you're interested.
Okay. Well, certainly you want to cover some of those points, but you know, one thing I did want to ask is, there's a significant number of veterans, as you educated me about, on college campuses. So is that entire audience really who you're targeting to participate in this class, or is there a specific audience within that group that you think would be a better fit?
It's a good question, Terry. And what we've found is that graduate students are oftentimes more independent and they've already been through the undergraduate experience. So I think the course is ideally designed for your first year and your transfer students. And particularly for those who this is the first time that they're on campus at a brick and mortar school, and they had that sort of deer in the headlights look where I'm a little bit apprehensive about being a full-time student. This is a great way to ease them into the routine, to give them some very tangible skills like time management, note-taking, but also most importantly is that they're doing this within a cohort of other veterans. And it's that community piece that I think is so vital and so important, and that's what makes this course very successful.
Okay. So a couple of questions came up while you were mentioning that. It's like, regarding the course, how long does it last and how many credits within your program does it count for?
So we keep this as a general elective for 2 credit hours, and it runs for 8 weeks every fall semester. And we typically average around 11 to 13 veterans in a cohort. And every time we run the course, which is 3 times now, we've not lost 1 student. And I think that that's important. And not only have we not lost a student in the class, but we didn't lose any students during that first semester that they were enrolled. And so I think that this really can provide dividends for setting student veterans up to be successful, giving them those tangible skills they need, but also, again, helping them integrate within the campus. And these are all great strategies for keeping students enrolled.
Okay. And I see a question here came up about, is the course qualified? And that, I know that's a question that came up to me a few times at some of the recent conferences we've attended. It's people coming up and asking the question about, does the VA consider a course like yours a qualified course?
Yeah, and that's a question I'm sure a lot of folks are asking themselves right now. And yes, it is. The VA is good about paying once they have more information. And so for the viewers listening today, oftentimes it's in financial aid, there's a veteran certifying official, and this is the person who certifies and ensures that all veterans are in approved courses. And what we did is our certifying official spoke with the VA and explained that this is a preparatory course for credit, it's an elective, and it's giving them that transition, and the VA has been very favorable since then.
So, one of the other questions that's commonly asked is, getting buy-in. Now, you were brought in into the program to help get a program like yours that you have on the University of Illinois going. What about someone who's been is interested in campaigning, the leadership to get something going, or they've been hired in a position and they want to introduce new programs, some of the things you're mentioning today. How do what's your strategy or suggestions for getting buy-in from, administration?
Getting by administration, what does that mean? Huh? That's never an easy thing, Terry. I would say I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel, but building off of what already exists on a campus. And so for our viewers today, I would look at and ask the question, where I work, do they already offer a first-year experience course or a transition course? For instance, we have transition courses for our international students. And so I would look at what's already in place for first-year learners, and then start to look at how can we craft something specifically for this veteran population. And it could be as easy as looking at course syllabi and finding out what are some of the parameters or content that they want to ensure all first-year students get, and then supplement that with veteran-specific materials. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that people can approach this project. But I would also start with the Veterans Advisory Committee or Task Force, if there's one on their campus.
Okay. So an interesting follow-up question to that is, people who would say, well, we're trying to integrate this veteran population into our campus, our environment, but yet the programming you're suggesting is segmenting them out.
Yeah.
So what's your response to that? How is that segmentation, in a sense, helping them integrate?
I think that that's an excellent question, and it's a question that comes up at conferences quite a bit. And I look at it that in our program for an undergrad, they have to earn approximately 125 to 130 credit hours. If we take 2 of those credit hours and we have just a veteran community that's specific, I personally don't think we're shortchanging the students or robbing their peers of diversity. And I think that, in other words, that our veterans will have plenty of opportunities to integrate in their other classes. And so most of my students who are enrolled in the transition course are already subsequently enrolled in 3 or 4 other academic courses that are obviously not veteran specific. And I think that we also want to look at veterans through the lens of diversity. The same reason that we have an LGBT resource center or a women's resource center or different cultural resource centers is because we identify that students have unique characteristics, and we want to be mindful, appreciative, and sensitive to those.
Good point. Thank you. So a question that came up earlier on from one of our audience members was, what resources should be in place on campus to support student veterans if a course like yours is not an option for us right now?
Okay, good question. I would continue to work closely with the Student Veterans chapter that most schools have already established, and I would then focus on an orientation, and I would use the book that we're talking about here today that we've written. I think that that's a great supplement at orientations and for folks who may not be able to provide an actual class. And an orientation is typically an informal barbecue where we bring new incoming student veterans, and we also have other veterans on campus. We keep it very informal. And we also have different folks from the community and who are on campus who work with veterans, and they just do a very brief 1 minute, this is who I am, this is what my office does, and these are the resources that I've brought. But what also precipitated the book was that I had so many students coming to me saying, I need something that I can sit down with that's going to give me the landscape of higher education. I need something that's going to teach me about budgeting my money now that I'm no longer on active duty. And so all this content and all of these experiences are what went into the book.
Good. And I see some questions coming up about that, and we'll get to some details about how people can get a copy of that in a moment. But one of the other questions came up, and you talked about this a bit, but the benefits of setting up a designated course for the veterans. So what are they benefiting? And you mentioned, you haven't lost a student as a result during that time that you've had them. So obviously that's a big benefit. But what are some of the other benefits that you've experienced from that?
I received a lot of emails after the course, and students were saying things like, when I first got here, I was afraid to be a student, but I didn't really know how to share that, or I was ashamed, or I was embarrassed. And I think that that shows part of military culture, is that veterans are oftentimes coming from a culture that says, hey, don't talk about your problems, just deal with it. And so it's easy for some of them to be silent. And when they're silent, then we don't necessarily know what they need. And so I think that the veterans course provided that buffer. The community piece is exceptionally important. And then I think also, Terry, just talking about tangible practical skills. How do you take notes as a student? Writing in higher education may be very different than the way that they've written in the past or in the military. And so these are things that we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of reflective writing and journaling, and then we also do a lot of informal presentations. I think that the course is built upon a foundation to get them to be reflective and comfortable speaking in front of a group.
Good. Another question here is about identifying student veterans. I know a lot of campuses are now implementing programs, and in order for the veteran to receive benefits, they in fact have to self-identify on application forms. But there's some campuses still don't.
Yeah.
So what steps are you going through to identify student veterans, and how do you inform them about this course?
That's $1 million question that we're actually doing right now. And we identify veterans, so we added to our admissions application a question, are you currently serving in the military, or are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? So we identify now through our admissions when veterans self-identify. And then we also get information from financial aid when they've now certified their benefits. And what I do is I take these lists and I have their contact information, and every week our admissions office sends us a spreadsheet of all identified veterans who have been admitted. And then what we do in the summer is we start the dialogue then, because what we find, Terry, is that once classes start in August, we've got 45,000 students to manage, and it's chaos, it's fast. So we want to make sure that we're making communication with our incoming veterans in the summer. So I typically start off with an email that gives them just sort of a very brief overview of the veterans program, different assistive resources, and then I also talk about the class and how they can register for it.
Good. Another question, and you alluded to this in the beginning, is about educating faculty and staff, about how better to serve veterans on campus. But what are you doing to partner with advisors? Because obviously, if they don't connect, or for some reason there's a disconnect between you and that process, obviously they're going to be visiting with an advisor during their initial process of getting on campus and getting registered. So how are you engaging those people, and what resources are being offered to them?
So our advisors are aware of the course, and I do quite a bit of programming and training and development with our advising staff. So we have different academic colleges, like the College of Engineering, the College of Education, et cetera, et cetera. And so typically, at least once a year, I'm sitting down with the advisors from each of these colleges, just giving them an update of the veterans program, and also so they know who I am. And then I also give them some skills, some basic veteran ally training is what we call it. And what I've recommended and what the colleges are doing this year is they're actually designating sort of an in-house veterans point of contact among their advising staff, so that student veterans in that college can just go to one person. And we're finding that that's a great strategy. Is we really want to keep this simple for the student veterans so they're not feeling referred all over campus or having to send out a bunch of different emails. And if our viewers are interested in the Veteran Ally Training, there's an article that I've actually published through Innovative Higher Education. They can send me an email, and then I'd be happy to point them in the direction so they can access that information.
Perfect. And I'll work with you to get that information so we can follow up in that email with them as well.
Great.
Now, I know you've done a lot of research and study on the topic of veterans in higher ed. So what's a theoretical model behind the course?
So I use a couple of different models, but adult learning theory is predominantly what I've used to frame the course. And so andragogy and then transformative learning. And then we're also big at looking at creating a conducive environment. And I think the environment is very important. And that's everything from, do we sit in a formal style with lecture, or do we sit in a circle? So I look at those types of things in the literature from adult learning theory. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a very strong emphasis on getting them to reflect on their service, but also to reflect on, how do you feel simply about being a student now? Or how do you feel about managing an academic program that's pretty intense with being a husband or a wife? Or how are you managing reconnecting with your children after a deployment? So we have a couple of different prompts, weekly prompts that the students reflect on. And then we also have, as I mentioned earlier, the small group dialogue and the informal presentations. And I think that these types of engagements are what really bring the cohort together and create that very tight communal feeling. There's a mentoring component, as I mentioned, and then there's also a meet with your advisor assignment, where they actually are required to sit down with their advisor and then sketch out their courses for the following semester. And then there's 2 books that they read. And the first book is obviously the one that we've written to give them that overall landscape and transition to the course. And then we have another book that I have them read and write a 5-page paper on. And the book that we used last semester is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. I think that books with veterans that have sort of the hero's journey or some sort of mission where somebody's going through a very transformative process are always very popular and very well received.
Interesting. So I know you've run, 3 courses now?
Yes.
In this program. So what are some of the positives and negatives that have come from that?
We'll start with the negatives. The negatives have been, I would say that obviously 13 from what I'm hearing on a national scope is actually a pretty strong enrollment, but we would like to get up to 15 to 20. And I think around 20 is where you want to cap it so it doesn't lose its essence. 15 to 20 would be ideal. It's also, traditionally, it's been all males who have enrolled in the course. And what's interesting, Terry, is that our student veterans group on campus, the officers within that group are predominantly women. And so I've asked, I said, why do you think that it's more men who are enrolling in the program, in the course? And there was a couple of different theories, but I think that ideally getting more diversity in the course would be helpful. And our students have also asked that we extend it to 16 weeks because they really enjoyed it. And then another component to improve the course would be to add a service component. Our students have asked for some sort of community service project that they can actually do as part of the course assignments. And in terms of the strengths, again, I think that it's this communal feeling. I call it a neutral space, in that it's a buffer to help incoming veterans acclimate to the campus and ease in. And I'm going to use a corny metaphor here, but rather than do the cannonball off the high dive, we're going in the shallow end, and we're just kind of gradually getting deeper and deeper in the pool once they become more confident. And that's why I think that this thing works very well, very effectively.
Great. So one of the, we talked about the book, and I know there's a lot of questions regarding it up here. So let's focus on that for a moment. What kind of topics did you choose to include in that publication?
So A lot of what I did before I started was I sat with my experiences in the military and what I personally went through, and then feedback from clients at the VA and also from students here. And then I went out and I spoke with different experts from across the country and also with a lot of student veterans. And I said, you know, what are some things that you feel would be helpful? And we started to identify themes. And that's how we essentially created the table of contents, was really looking at what these primary themes are. And it's as simple as addressing quite candidly that many veterans who are coming to higher ed are unsure, or they have a flood of emotions. So being able to address that right out the gate is important. Things from how do you manage your time? How do you communicate with faculty and staff? Many veterans have said, you know, I'm used to being a non-commissioned officer and barking orders at people, but I'm intimidated to go talk to my TA now or to my associate professor. These things are included. Budgeting. How do I go from making a steady paycheck where I'm paid once a month and I've got all these health benefits and now I'm on a student budget? How do I reshift and refocus my spending habits? So I feel that we've covered just a very thorough, comprehensive landscape, and we've used easy to follow language. We don't use a lot of jargon. We don't use a lot of theory, even though it's built on theory. We keep it very straightforward and written for an actual student veteran.
Good. And I know just the customers that I've engaged with have used the book themselves, have you know, highlighted the ease of the read and how it is caters to someone just being able to pick it up comfortably and flip through the pages and not feel intimidated. So yeah, kudos on that. Exactly. Now, the question is, you mentioned you're using it as a part of the text or for the course, but I mean, is that your recommendation, or can it be used for orientation, a resource, or other factors?
I would recommend, honestly, I would recommend providing to advising staff so that advisors have a baseline of understanding of who veterans are, what their experiences are like, and also being able to give them those tools that are outlined in the book. So I think giving to advising staff is important. I think if they can't offer a formal course, then at the very least being able to provide one to all incoming veterans as part of an orientation, or if there's not an orientation in place, mailing it to incoming veterans along with other welcome aboard materials. So I think that there's a couple of different creative pathways, but the bottom line is you want to get these in the hands of student veterans. And I've had other schools tell me that they're going to buy them for their student veterans lounge or their resource center and just simply have them on the table in areas where they know veterans will congregate.
That's certainly a good point. I did want to just take a moment here and highlight the book. For those who haven't seen it, this is the book. It's called Life During College, The Veteran's Guide to Success. It is its first edition, just came out and launched in February. Now, I want to put up on the screen here a link that you can use to download a free copy of the book, so you can take a look at that as a PDF version. But when you do request it on the form, after you get the PDF, it's going to say, would you like a hard copy? For those who would like a hard copy mailed to them, I know the book retails for $29.95, but if you participate in that, there's a code that you can put in and purchase a hard copy for yourself for $10 and some shipping and handling. So if that's an option, please take advantage of it and review the materials, and so you get a sense of what it is. You know, you mentioned budgets. You know, with new programs getting started, I know budgets can be tight, and to bring a program like this for books for all your vets can be a struggle. So certainly look for promotions. We have those throughout the year, but I also encourage people to leverage local organizations. We do have the ability to customize the book, brand the book to the school, and create a customized version. So with that, you can go out and seek sponsors from, say, local military-focused credit union, other organizations like, say, USAA or et cetera in your community, and have them help support the book for that audience. So I'll leave that information up on the screen as we continue the discussion so that you can take advantage of that. Now, I mentioned earlier in the program, you've done some white papers, I know, for us on different topics, and you've also done some studies and white papers for other organizations.
Yeah.
Tell us about the focus of your study on those papers and the white papers that you've written.
Sure. Terry, before I do that, I just want to add to what you said that, again, I'm very realistic in terms of how budgets work and how we're all having to make do now with less and less resources available. And what we've found is that if a student has a hard time paying for a book, or if a university wants to provide these, look at your local based resources, as you mentioned, like the VFW or the Marine Corps League or the American Legion, that these are groups that oftentimes will call my office and say, hey, we just had a meeting and we want to help student veterans. How can we help? And so it may be that a local post or group in town sponsors an order of 200 books. So being creative in that way, I think, is always important. And now to your other question, so I've done a little bit of research primarily on student veterans' transition to higher education. And I also look at stigma. I look at how veterans internalize assumptions that they feel are either on a college campus, what their engagements are like with staff, faculty, and then from that, how we can better educate faculty and staff and create a more inclusive climate on campus. So those are the things that I look at. And then I also have done research and have published in areas of just practical programming ideas, like how do you coordinate a student veteran discussion panel? How do you provide greater insight to the faculty of the experiences that many veterans have? How do you build on, in a career services standpoint, all of this wonderful and advanced training that many veterans have had? So I've kind of gone full circle, and I'm currently writing right now an article about the student veterans class that we've put together, the transition course that I hope to have at a publisher sometime in the fall.
Awesome. So one of the things I know, and again, we'll include some of the links or those white papers to our audience who participate in today. So watch for an email coming out after this program, and I'll be sure to include on that the links for those white papers and other resources as well.
Great.
Now, I think, I know I've gone to conferences talking on the topic of transition related to student veterans, as you have, and I don't think I've been to one where I haven't had a large portion of that audience come up to me and say, you know what, I've just been tasked with setting up the veterans program.
That's right.
I have no idea what a veterans program is and
That's right.
how to go about it. So what resources do you offer specifically? I know we talked about our book, but Nick, what do you have to offer for someone that's like, you know, kind of lost? They watch this webinar, they're interested, but they want more.
I think that we have a tight community, so joining NASPA Veterans is a great start. Going out and looking at what's been published already, so you don't have to start from scratch. And then if anybody's interested in actual specific individually tailored programs, or working with faculty and staff, or working with veterans offices, I also provide consultation services, which I'm happy to extend to anybody who's interested. And for that information, they can just go to the College Transition Publishing website, where my contact information is available.
Perfect. Great. And I know we run over a couple minutes here, so I want to wrap this up. But I know there's a whole list of questions here, and we'll get to those separately after the program.
Great.
But before we end, I did want to let our audience know that, you know, we've talked about a number of resources, and I often joke to people that my most popular page on our website is the one that's called Free Stuff.
Yeah.
Colleges seem to like free stuff. So we try to put a lot of value into that page. There's your white papers, a number of other white papers myself and other people have written, so I encourage you to go there, take advantage of those, print them up, put them on your website, whatever. All we ask is that you acknowledge the correct author as well as the source, being our company, College Transition Publishing. We discussed a few resources on there and added the website and social media. That is going to, so after this program's over, immediately after, I'm going to put up a screenshot for my contact information as well as Nick's, so that you can contact us with additional questions. We're also going to be working on a new website, a veteran site. It was part of my agreement with Nick that was to help create a resource for everybody, kind of like this environment now, where people can come in, watch webinars, see recorded ones that we've done, as well as start gathering information from other people in the industry that are accomplishing great things on their campuses. Right. So our focus is to put that up there, have a number of resources here available. My goal is by the fall, so stay in touch. We'll keep you posted on that. We're also working on a number of other resources, additional books. One of them is called Camo to Career. It's a book focused on the transition after college to a career, or after military service to a career. And so we're constantly looking for reviewers and people to assist with that project. So if you have a niche and you're working with people, particularly military veterans, as they transition into a new career and interested in getting something, part of your work published, please let me know. I'm happy to work with you on that. Nick, I did want to say one last time, thank you again for all your resources and information and joining us today.
My pleasure, Terry, and I just want to take a moment to thank everybody here who's listening. I'm sure they're already engaged working with veterans, and that's honorable work. As both an OIF veteran myself, as well as a colleague, I appreciate what everybody's doing. So thank you, and thank you again, Terry, for having me.
I appreciate it. My pleasure. So one last reminder, we will have an email out to you here momentarily after this. It will include a recording of the webinar. So I encourage you, please, if you found it of value, get it, share it with your colleagues on campus, share it with the advising staff, share it with your administration, ask them to spend 45 minutes to review it and get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish on college campuses. And then we'll include some resources in those emails. Remember, take advantage of the download, a free copy of Nick's book, Life During College, The Veteran's Guide to Success. Review that. If you like a hard copy, get one for a discounted price, so take advantage of that. That'll be good for a few more days after this program. And finally, again, thanks, Nick, for everything, and thank you for everybody who participated and for all your work serving the military veterans. Thank you.
Thank you.